She stood in the glittering lobby of Christie's premier gallery, her weathered canvas tote bag and vintage floral dress making her as conspicuous as a sparrow among peacocks. The Luminous Collection viewing is by invitation only. The concierge announced, barely glancing at her handcrafted silver brooch, the one thing of value she wore. Perhaps you've mistaken this for the public exhibition downstairs? A woman in diamonds smirked behind her champagne flute. Security getting lax these days, she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Emma Clarke said nothing. She simply produced her invitation card and walked forward through the whispers, through the snide glances, until one phone call from her husband silenced them all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Luminous Collection auction at Christie's Premier Gallery was the crowning jewel of New York's spring art season, its marble and gold, interior gleaming under crystal chandeliers like the treasures it housed. Every surface reflected wealth, from the polished mahogany display pedestals to the rare orchids adorning reception tables that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The air itself seemed different here, perfumed with exclusivity and old money. The gentle murmur of privileged voices discussing millions as casually as others might discuss lunch plans. This wasn't just an auction, it was a social battlefield where lineage and bank accounts determined your worth. Attendance required more than wealth. It demanded the right connections, the right pedigree, the right appearance. The guest list read like a who's who of American aristocracy, media moguls, third-generation investment bankers, tech billionaires, and the occasional celebrity whose cultural significance had been deemed sufficient by the gallery's notoriously selective board. Outside the main exhibition hall, a velvet rope separated those worthy of viewing the collection before bidding from those merely hoping for a glimpse. And today, Emma Clarke stood firmly on the wrong side, her simple dress and unadorned appearance marking her as unmistakably out of place. At 42, Emma carried a quiet dignity that needed no announcement. Her chestnut hair was gathered in a simple chignon, strands of silver at her temples, catching the light like threads of wisdom. Her eyes, a deep amber that shifted between honey and mahogany depending on the light, held a depth of knowledge that most in the room would never recognize. She wore a vintage 1950s dress in faded blue floral cotton, beautifully preserved but clearly not designer, and carried a worn canvas tote rather than the requisite Hermes or Chanel. Her only jewelry was a handcrafted silver brooch shaped like intertwining vines, studded with what most assumed were simple glass beads, but were actually rare natural pearls in unusual colors, a family heirloom more valuable for its craftsmanship than its components. But the crowd saw only a middle-aged woman with sensible shoes and a department store aesthetic, her presence an offense to their carefully curated exclusivity. The concierge, a man named Gregory with an artificially refined accent and a tailored suit that screamed new money trying to look old, intercepted Emma at the entrance to the main gallery. "I believe there's been some confusion," he said, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby guests. The Luminous Collection preview is strictly for registered bidders and their representatives. The public exhibition is downstairs, past the gift shop. He gestured dismissively at her tote bag, his eyes lingering disapprovingly on her practical flats. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable there. This level requires appropriate credentials." His emphasis on the last two words carried unmistakable judgment. Jessica Montgomery, heiress to a banking fortune and self-appointed social gatekeeper, lowered her champagne flute and laughed softly. "They really should post security at the elevators," she remarked to her circle of identically dressed friends. "The help keeps getting confused about which entrance to use." The group tittered, their diamond tennis bracelets catching the light. As they raised manicured hands to conceal smirks that weren't meant to be hidden at all, Emma felt their eyes boring into her back, cataloguing every aspect of her appearance that marked her as an intruder in their world. Emma's fingers brushed her invitation, heavy cream cardstock with gold lettering, identical to those held by others in the room, but in her hands somehow transformed into something suspicious. She held it out, her voice level and clear. "I have an invitation." Gregory's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched as he took the card, turning it over as though searching for evidence of forgery. The scanner in his hand beeped green, confirming its authenticity, but his expression remained skeptical. "There seems to be some irregularity," he said loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "While this appears to be valid, I'll need to verify with management. Perhaps you could wait in the lobby until this is sorted." What he really meant was clear to everyone. You don't belong here, regardless of what this piece of paper says. Emma stood her ground, her amber eyes steady. "The preview begins in 10 minutes. I'll wait inside, thank you." As Emma walked into the gallery, the social media feed on screens around the room became a digital pillory. Phones emerged from designer clutches, posts appearing in real time with thinly veiled contempt. "Luminous gate, who let the substitute teacher in?" Read one post from a fashion blogger's verified account, zooming in on Emma's sensible shoes. "Standard slipping at Christie's," wrote the son of a media mogul, shared immediately by a dozen others in the room. Bradley Winston, a 30-something venture capitalist whose father's connections had secured his invitation, stepped directly into Emma's path, his voice pitched to carry. "Look what blew in with the cleaning crew," he announced, gesturing theatrically at Emma's dress. "This is Christie's premier gallery, not a Salvation Army fashion show." The crowd's response was immediate. Scattered laughter and approving murmurs as phones captured the moment, comments multiplying. "Send her back to the bus stop," someone called from behind a display pedestal. Emma's expression remained neutral, her posture straight as she moved past the jeering group. But on the screens around the room, where the gallery's social media displayed selected posts, the public watching online was having a very different reaction. Comments defending the unknown woman were appearing faster than the gallery's moderators could filter them out, their outrage building with each new post mocking her presence. The gallery's interior was a cathedral to wealth, its 50-foot ceilings adorned with gold leaf detailing and walls lined with museum-quality lighting. Glass cases held treasures that most would only ever see in books, a collection of rare Art Nouveau jewelry pieces designed by René Lalique, each worth millions, displayed like exotic butterflies under perfect illumination. Members of the elite crowd lounged on custom velvet settees, sipping champagne from crystal flutes, their jewelry and watches functioning as visible price tags of their worth. A finance executive, Mason Reed, sprawled with intentional casualness near a central display, his Italian loafers propped inappropriately close to a glass case holding a diamond and emerald necklace once worn by European royalty. Even the cleaning staff gets invitations now, he remarked loudly as Emma paused to examine a particularly beautiful sapphire and moonstone pendant. What's next? Validating parking for the delivery people. His companions laughed, their eyes sliding dismissively over Emma's simple attire. One woman, dripping in borrowed Harry Winston diamonds, whispered loudly, maybe she's looking for jewelry-making ideas for her Etsy shop. Emma continued her careful examination of each piece, her knowledge evident in her focused gaze, but her expertise invisible to those determined to see only her outer appearance. She moved with the practiced eye of someone intimately familiar with the collection, pausing longest at pieces whose true value might not be immediately apparent to casual observers. The gallery's senior curator, Dr. Vivian Sinclair, approached, With obvious displeasure, her tailored Chanel suit and perfectly coiffed silver bob designed to project authority. "This is highly irregular," she said, making no attempt to lower her voice. "The Luminous Collection preview is for serious collectors and qualified bidders, not casual browsers." She gestured at a particularly stunning diamond and platinum Art Deco bracelet that Emma had been studying. These pieces represent the pinnacle of early 20th century craftsmanship, not costume jewelry inspiration. Perhaps the general exhibition downstairs would be more appropriate for your level of interest. The crowd murmured approval, some nodding vigorously, their exclusivity reinforced by the curator's dismissal. "We have standards to maintain," Dr. Sinclair added pointedly. "The provenance and significance of these pieces require a certain level of appreciation that comes with a background." Her emphasis on the last word made it clear she found Emma lacking in both education and breeding. The insult was delivered with such polished precision that it seemed almost refined, but the crowd's smirks revealed its true nature. Emma's gaze never wavered from the bracelet, her voice soft but clear. "The craftsmanship is exceptional, but this isn't original to the designer's vision. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The central diamond has been replaced. The setting has been slightly modified to accommodate a stone of different dimensions than the original." A hush fell over the nearby listeners, Dr. Sinclair's composure slipping momentarily before she recovered. "That's absurd. This piece has been authenticated by our experts. Its provenance is impeccable." Emma nodded politely and moved on without arguing further. But the damage was done. A seed of doubt had been planted, and several potential bidders exchanged concerned glances. Dr. Sinclair's face flushed with irritation as she gestured to an assistant, whispering urgently while glancing back at the bracelet. The pre-auction cocktail reception grew more animated as champagne flowed freely, the early awkwardness of Emma's presence seemingly forgotten as the crowd returned to their natural habitat of networking and status signaling. Conversations about vacation homes in the Hamptons and private school waitlists created a bubble of privilege that excluded anyone without the right references. Alexander Harrington III was the gallery's star client, a silver-foxed venture capitalist with old money, connections and new tech investments. At 55, he moved through the room like a shark through shallow water, his custom Tom Ford suit and subtle Patek Philippe watch speaking of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Women adjusted their jewelry when he passed. Men straightened, imperceptibly, hoping to be acknowledged. He paused near a display containing a magnificent ruby and diamond choker, his expression one of practiced appreciation, as his assistant dutifully made notes about pieces that caught his interest. Alexander noticed Emma studying the same case, and his lip curled slightly. "These pieces have historical significance beyond their monetary value," he said loudly, clearly intended for her to overhear. "The collection represents cultural heritage that should remain with those who understand its importance." The implication was clear. People like Emma didn't qualify. His entourage nodded in solemn agreement, their expressions suggesting they were contemplating profound cultural philosophy rather than engaging in thinly veiled classism. Emma moved to another display, her focus undisturbed by the commentary. "You're following her." She paused longest at an understated platinum ring featuring an unusual pink-orange Padparadscha sapphire surrounded by diamonds. Not the flashiest piece in the collection, but one whose craftsmanship warranted special attention. Helena Beaumont, auction coordinator and the face of Christie's social media presence, approached with a cameraman in tow, her smile professional, but eyes calculating. "We're doing live segments for our online audience," she explained to the room at large, "to build excitement for tomorrow's auction." She positioned herself near Alexander Harrington, clearly intending to interview the gallery's most prestigious client, but paused when she noticed Emma examining the sapphire ring. Something flickered across her face, opportunity perhaps, as she redirected the camera. "Excuse me," she called to Emma, her voice honeyed with false warmth. "Would you mind telling our online audience what brings you to the Luminous Collection preview today?" The question seemed innocent, but the intent was clear to everyone in the room. This was to be a public humiliation broadcast to Christie's million-plus followers. The crowd quieted, phones raised to capture what they anticipated would be an awkward fumbling from someone clearly out of her depth. Emma turned, her amber eyes meeting the camera directly. "I'm here to examine the craftsmanship and authenticity of several key pieces before the bidding begins," she replied, her voice calm and knowledgeable. "Particularly the Art Nouveau pieces, which have distinctive characteristics that can be difficult to authenticate without direct examination." Helena's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the embarrassing response she'd anticipated. She pressed on. "And what qualifies you to assess such valuable pieces? Do you work in the industry?" The question hung in the air, loaded with assumption. Emma smiled slightly, about to respond, when a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Richard Montgomery, Christie's Director of Special Collections, burst through the doors in obvious distress, his usually impeccable appearance somewhat disheveled as he scanned the room urgently. When his eyes landed on Emma, visible relief washed over his face. "Mrs. Clarke, thank goodness you're here," he called, striding across the marble floor with purpose. "When they said there was an issue with your invitation, I was concerned you might have left." The room fell silent, confusion rippling through the crowd as Richard reached Emma and extended his hand respectfully. "I cannot apologize enough for any misunderstanding. Had I known you were already in the building, I would have personally escorted you in." Emma took his hand with a gracious nod. "No harm done, Richard. These things happen." Dr. Sinclair approached rapidly, her composure now completely professional. "Mrs. Clarke, I wasn't aware you would be joining us today. What a pleasant surprise." The dramatic shift in tone wasn't lost on the crowd, whose collective confusion was palpable. Helena Beaumont's camera continued rolling, capturing the unexpected turn of events as Richard turned to address the room. "For those who haven't had the pleasure," Richard announced, his voice carrying the authority of his position, "allow me to introduce Emma Clarke, one of the foremost experts in Art Nouveau and Art Deco jewelry authentication. Mrs. Clarke has consulted for the Metropolitan Museum, the Smithsonian, and yes, Christie's on numerous occasions." A murmur rippled through the crowd as phones were lowered slightly, confusion replacing mockery. Jessica Montgomery stepped forward, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she extended her hand with newfound warmth. Emma Clarke. Not the A. Emma Clarke, who authenticated the lost Fabergé egg discovered in that Midwestern estate sale. Emma nodded modestly. "The very same. But I thought—" Jessica gestured vaguely at Emma's simple dress and lack of designer accessories, confusion evident. Emma smiled, neither offended nor apologetic. "When examining pieces of this caliber, I prefer not to wear anything that might scratch or damage them. Professional habit, I'm afraid." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, their earlier mockery now cast in an embarrassing light as they realized they'd been ridiculing one of the field's most respected experts. Gregory, the concierge, had turned an alarming shade of red, his earlier condescension now a potential career liability. Alexander Harrington approached, his demeanor suddenly collegial. "Mrs. Clarke, I've read your monograph on identifying fabrication techniques in pre-war platinum settings. Fascinating work. I'd be honored to get your thoughts on the Cartier pieces in the West Gallery." Before Emma could respond, The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically as the main doors opened once more. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as all eyes turned toward the new arrival. James Clarke entered without fanfare, his presence commanding attention not through ostentation, but through quiet assurance. At 46, he carried himself with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone in the room. His charcoal suit was expertly tailored but intentionally understated. His only concession to luxury, a vintage Rolex Submariner that had seen actual use rather than safe storage. What distinguished James wasn't his appearance, but the respect he immediately commanded. Richard Montgomery rushed to greet him, followed closely by two Christie's board members who had materialized as if summoned by an unheard alarm. "Mr. Clarke, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow's auction," Richard said, extending his hand with obvious deference. James shook it firmly. "Change of plans. I decided to join my wife for the preview." His voice was pleasant, but carried the unmistakable timbre of someone accustomed to being heard the first time. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd as connections were made. Clarke. James Clarke. The name registered differently with different groups. To the tech crowd, he was the founder of Nexus Quantum Systems. To the old money set, he was the intensely private billionaire who had systematically acquired some of the world's most important private art collections. To the jewelry specialists, he was the anonymous buyer who had purchased the legendary Azure Heart diamond at Sotheby's last year. Emma moved toward her husband, a genuine smile warming her face. James met her halfway, placing a protective hand at the small of her back as he nodded greeting to those nearby. The contrast between their modest demeanors and the power they quietly wielded was striking. "Having a good time, darling?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear the irony in it. Emma's eyes sparkled with private amusement. "Educational," she replied. "Very educational." Alexander Harrington approached the couple, hand extended and face arranged in an expression of pleased surprise that didn't quite reach his eyes. "James, what an unexpected pleasure. I had no idea Mrs. Clarke was your wife." James took the offered hand without enthusiasm. "Emma prefers to maintain her professional reputation separate from our personal connection," he replied, his tone making it clear he was aware of exactly how his wife had been treated. "Her expertise stands on its own merit." Alexander nodded too enthusiastically. Of course, her reputation is legendary." Helena Beaumont approached with her camera crew, sensing a story worth capturing. "Mr. Clarke, would you care to share your thoughts on the Luminous Collection with our online audience?" James glanced at the camera, then at his wife before responding. "I'm afraid I haven't had the opportunity to examine the pieces as thoroughly as Emma has. I trust her assessment completely." His deferral to his wife's expertise was pointed and not lost on the crowd. Dr. Sinclair stepped forward, professional, mask firmly in place. "Perhaps Mrs. Clarke would be willing to share her initial impressions. Our online audience would benefit tremendously from her insights." Emma nodded graciously. "Most of the collection is exceptional, particularly the Lalique butterfly brooches and the Boucheron emerald suite. As I mentioned earlier, there are questions about the Art Deco bracelet that should be addressed before bidding opens." Dr. Sinclair's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We'll certainly review that piece again. Your eye for detail is, as always, impeccable." The atmosphere in the room had transformed completely. Those who had mocked Emma now competed to catch her attention, offering champagne and attempting to engage her in conversation about pieces they had previously pretended to understand. Their efforts were transparent and largely ignored by both Emma and James, who moved through the exhibition methodically, examining pieces with professional interest. Jessica Montgomery, desperate to salvage her social position, approached with an overly familiar smile. "Emma, you simply must join us for lunch at Le Bernardin next week. A small gathering of collectors. You'd be the perfect addition." Emma smiled politely. "Thank you, but I'll be in London authenticating a newly discovered Fabergé piece, perhaps another time." The rejection was delivered so graciously that Jessica couldn't take offense, but the message was clear. Emma had no interest in social climbing among those who had dismissed her based on appearance. Gregory the concierge hovered nearby, visibly distressed, until he finally gathered the courage to approach. "Mrs. Clarke, Mr. Clarke, please accept my sincere apologies for the misunderstanding earlier. Had you known my net worth, you would have treated me differently." Emma completed his thought calmly. "That's precisely the problem, isn't it?" Gregory flushed crimson, unable to deny the truth in her words. James placed a gentle hand on his wife's shoulder, his expression one of quiet pride rather than intervention. The gallery's social media feed, still displayed on screens around the room, had shifted dramatically. Comments now praised Emma's unassuming expertise and criticized the obvious classism of the initial reception. Emma Clarke legend was trending, with users sharing stories of her remarkable career identifying lost masterpieces and mentoring young experts from non-traditional backgrounds. As the evening progressed, Emma and James found themselves in conversation with Richard Montgomery near a display of particularly fine emerald pieces. Richard's manner was genuinely respectful, rather than performatively deferential. "Your assessment of the Art Deco bracelet was spot on, Emma," he admitted quietly. "Our team re-examined it after your comment and found documentation confirming the central stone was indeed replaced in the 1950s. We'll be updating the catalogue before tomorrow's auction." Emma nodded, unsurprised. The setting modifications were subtle but unmistakable to someone familiar with the designer's work. Richard hesitated before continuing in a lower voice. "I want to personally apologize for how you were received today. It's inexcusable." "Not your fault," Emma replied simply. "Cultural problems require cultural solutions." James, who had been quietly observing the room while the expert spoke, turned his attention back to the conversation. "Speaking of tomorrow's auction, Richard, I'd like to discuss something with you privately, if you have a moment." Richard nodded immediately. "Of course, we can use my office." As the two men stepped away, Emma continued her examination of the collection, now left respectfully alone by those who had previously crowded her. The mood in the gallery had shifted from festive to subdued, many guests uncomfortably aware of how quickly they had rushed to judgment. Dr. Sinclair approached Emma again, this time without cameras or audience. "Your identification of the replaced stone was impressive," she acknowledged. "Most experts miss the subtle differences in the setting." Emma nodded. "It's all in the details. The original would have had a slightly different color profile as, well, more fire, less brilliance." "You've built quite a remarkable career," Dr. Sinclair continued, curiosity overcoming her earlier dismissiveness. "If you don't mind my asking, why do you choose to maintain such a understated profile? With your reputation, you could command quite a presence in these circles." Emma studied a particularly beautiful emerald necklace before answering. "I'm interested in the craftsmanship, the history, the stories these pieces tell. The social aspect has never appealed to me." She paused, meeting Dr. Sinclair's gaze directly. "And I find people reveal their true character more readily when they don't know who they're speaking to." Dr. Sinclair had the grace to look uncomfortable. A fair point. The evening was winding down when James returned to Emma's side, a satisfied expression barely concealed beneath his usual reserved demeanor. "Ready to go, darling?" he asked, offering his arm. As they moved toward the exit, the crowd parted respectfully, many attempting to catch their attention with overly friendly farewells. Alexander Harrington intercepted them near the door, his manner overly familiar. "James, Emma, I'm hosting a small dinner at Daniel after the auction tomorrow. Nothing formal, just a few serious collectors discussing future acquisitions. I'd be honored if you'd join us." James glanced at Emma before responding. "We'll check our schedule," he said non-committally. "Good evening, Alexander." As they stepped into the elevator, Emma finally allowed herself a small smile. "Productive. Conversation with Richard." James matched her expression with one of his own. "Very. I think tomorrow's auction will be interesting." The elevator doors closed on the exclusive gathering, leaving behind a transformed atmosphere, one where certainty had been replaced by uncomfortable self-awareness, and where appearances had been proven once again to be the least reliable measure of worth. The events of the preview evening spread through New York's elite collecting circles like wildfire, with multiple versions of the story circulating by midnight. Some focused on Emma's expertise, revealing flaws in Christie's authentication process. Others emphasized the social embarrassment of those who had mocked her. Still others speculated about James Clarke's private meeting with Richard Montgomery. But all agreed on one thing. Tomorrow's auction of the Luminous Collection would be one no one would soon forget. The morning of the auction dawned bright and clear, Manhattan's skyline crisp against a perfect blue sky. Inside Christie's premier gallery, staff moved with increased urgency, making final preparations for what promised to be the season's most lucrative sale. The Luminous Collection's estimated value exceeded $78 million, with several pieces expected to break individual records. Exhibition assistants polished already immaculate display cases, while security personnel conducted final sweeps, their earpieces occasionally crackling with updates. Overnight, something had shifted. The gallery's social media accounts had been flooded with comments about the previous evening's preview, hashtags multiplying as the story spread through collecting circles. Emma Clarke legend continued trending, forcing Christie's PR team into damage control mode. A hastily produced video feature highlighting Emma's career accomplishments had been posted to the gallery's accounts by dawn, an obvious attempt to reframe the narrative and associate the auction house with her expertise rather than the elitism on display. Behind the scenes, Richard Montgomery had called an emergency meeting with his executive team, their expressions grim as they reviewed screen captures of posts mocking Emma that had been made from the gallery's own digital displays. The marketing director looked physically ill as she scrolled through public reactions. "This is a disaster," she muttered, showing Richard a particularly viral post comparing Emma's reception to scenes from Pretty Woman. "We're being portrayed as elitist snobs." "We were elitist snobs," Richard corrected flatly, "and now we need to fix it." He turned to Dr. Sinclair, whose usually perfect posture had given way to uncharacteristic slumping. "What's the status on that Art Deco bracelet Emma identified?" Dr. Sinclair swallowed visibly. She was right. The central stone was replaced in 1953 after the original was damaged. "We've updated the catalogue and notified potential bidders, but it's embarrassing that she spotted it immediately while our team missed it entirely." Richard nodded grimly. "And that's why she's Emma Clarke. Make sure the correction prominently credits her identification." He checked his watch. "The doors open to registered bidders in 90 minutes. I want everyone on their absolute best behavior. Anyone, and I mean anyone, who treats a guest with less than perfect courtesy will be terminated immediately. Understood?" The team nodded soberly, fully grasping the severity of the situation. Christie's reputation for expertise had taken a hit, and with it, potentially their commission percentages and future consignments. As the meeting disbanded, Richard remained behind, staring thoughtfully at his phone. His conversation with James Clarke the previous evening replayed in his mind, leaving him both concerned and intrigued about what would unfold in the coming hours. By 10 o'clock, the gallery had transformed into a hive of activity. Registered. Bidders arrived in waves, greeted with a now excessive cordiality by staff who had clearly received stern warnings about their conduct. The gallery's live feed displayed the arriving guests alongside highlights from the collection, professional commentators offering insights on expected sale prices and notable attendees. Helena Beaumont had undergone a remarkable transformation. Overnight, her previous desire for sensationalism replaced by rigorous professionalism as she interviewed early arrivals. "We're anticipating tremendous interest in the Art Nouveau pieces," she told the camera, her smile perfectly calibrated, "particularly following yesterday's masterclass in authentication from the renowned Emma Clarke." The crowd gathering in. The auction room was a who's who of international wealth. Saudi princes seated near Silicon Valley founders, old European money alongside new Asian billionaires. Despite the diversity of origins, they shared a common language of privilege, exchanging pleasantries about recent acquisitions and private museum donations. Jessica Montgomery arrived early, strategically selecting a seat that would place her in the camera frame without being too obvious about it. Her outfit had been chosen with social media in mind, a Chanel suit in a flattering shade of blue that would photograph well under the gallery's lighting. She scanned the room repeatedly, her anxiety poorly concealed as she watched for Emma and James Clarke's arrival. Alexander Harrington entered with his usual entourage, nodding to acquaintances. As he made his way to a reserved section in the second row, his expression was focused, his assistant carrying a leather portfolio containing notes on the pieces he intended to acquire. As Christie's most reliable high-value client, he had secured prime positioning and the personal attention of a senior auction liaison who hovered nearby, anticipating his needs. Gregory, the concierge, had been reassigned to the service entrance for the day, his demotion swift and public. In his place stood a woman whose warm smile and genuine courtesy signaled the hasty correction of the gallery's approach. As she welcomed guests, her eyes frequently darted to the main entrance, clearly under instruction to alert management the moment the Clarkes appeared. By 10:45, the auction room was nearly at capacity, the crowd growing restless with anticipation. The auctioneer, William Barrett, renowned for his ability to extract maximum bids through a combination of psychological insight and theatrical timing, reviewed his notes at the podium. The first lot would open in 15 minutes, but the gallery's management team continued to cast anxious glances toward the door. At precisely 10:52, a subtle shift in the room's energy signaled the arrival of Emma and James Clarke. Unlike the previous evening, there was no mistaking their significance today. Emma had made no concessions to the crowd's expectations. She wore a simple grey dress with her signature silver brooch, her hair arranged in the same practical chignon. What had changed was not her appearance, but the reception it received. The crowd parted respectfully as the couple made their way to their seats, murmurs of recognition spreading through the room. Those who had been most vocal in their mockery the previous day now studied their auction catalogues with sudden intensity, avoiding eye contact. Richard Montgomery intercepted the couple, extending his hand with genuine warmth. "Emma, James, thank you for joining us. We've reserved seats in the front row if that suits you." Emma smiled politely. "The third row will be fine, Richard. I prefer to observe the room." Richard nodded, understanding the choice was deliberate. Positioning themselves among the bidders rather than accepting special treatment. He escorted them personally, aware of the eyes following their progress. Helena Beaumont approached with a camera operator, her manner notably more subdued than the previous evening. Mrs. Clarke, might I trouble you for a brief comment on the collection before the bidding begins? Our online audience would value your perspective. Emma considered the request, then nodded. The Luminous Collection represents one of the most comprehensive assemblages of Art Nouveau and early Art Deco pieces to come to market in the past decade. What makes it particularly significant is the provenance. These pieces have remained in the original family collection since acquisition, some for over a century. That kind of unbroken ownership history is increasingly rare. Helena nodded appreciatively, clearly relieved at the professional courtesy Emma extended despite the previous day's treatment. And do you have a particular favorite among the lots? Emma's expression softened slightly. The Padparadscha sapphire ring is exceptional. Not the most valuable piece, but perhaps the most perfect in terms of design harmony and craftsmanship. Whoever acquires it will be steward to a masterpiece of restraint in an era that often favored elaborate statements. As Emma and James took their seats, the atmosphere in the room had subtly transformed. What had been anticipation tinged with social competitiveness now carried an undercurrent of something else, curiosity and uncertainty about the Clarke's intentions. James sat comfortably, his posture relaxed but attentive, offering a reassuring smile to his wife as the auctioneer called the room to order. William Barrett stepped to the podium at exactly 11 tone, his voice carrying effortlessly through the space. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Christie's Premier Gallery for this extraordinary offering of the Luminous Collection. Today, we present 78 exceptional pieces spanning the Art Nouveau and Art Deco movements, each representing the pinnacle of craftsmanship and design from 1890 to 1935. The screens around the room displayed the first lot, a delicate lalique glass and enamel pendant featuring intertwined dragonflies, their wings rendered in plique azur enamel that allowed light to pass through like stained glass. We open with Lot 1, a rare lalique pendant circa 1898, previously exhibited at the Paris Exposition Universelle of 1900. We'll start the bidding at $400,000. Hands rose immediately, the bidding advancing in $25,000 increments. Emma watched with quiet interest, making occasional notes in her catalogue, but showing no inclination to participate. James similarly observed, his attention seemingly divided between the auction and discreet glances at his phone. The first 10 lots sold briskly, each achieving or exceeding the estimated values. The energy in the room built steadily, bidders growing more comfortable as the rhythm of the auction established itself. Alexander Harrington secured 3 pieces in quick succession, his confident nods to the auctioneer carrying the casual certainty of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. When Lot 11 appeared on the screens, the Art Deco bracelet Emma had identified as containing a replacement stone, a subtle tension rippled through the room. The auctioneer acknowledged the updated information in the catalogue, crediting expert identification by Mrs. Emma Clarke for the correction. The adjustment had reduced the estimated value by nearly 30%, and bidding proceeded more cautiously, eventually selling for just above the revised estimate. Dr. Sinclair, watching from the side of the room, visibly winced at the reduced price but nodded in resigned acceptance. The credibility of the entire auction had been at stake, and the transparent correction had preserved the integrity of the process, if not the originally anticipated commission. The auction proceeded efficiently through the morning, the collection's quality evident in the consistently strong prices achieved. Emma and James remained attentive but passive observers, their presence a subtle gravitational force that continued to draw curious glances. By the lunch break at 1:30, 40 lots had been sold for a combined total exceeding $45 million. The crowd dispersed to the gallery's catering area, where conversations inevitably centered on the Clarkes and speculation about their intentions. Why attend if not to bid? Was their presence merely to validate the authentication process following yesterday's incident? Or was something else at play? Alexander Harrington maneuvered through the lunch reception until he found himself conveniently beside James, his approach calculated to appear coincidental. "Quite a successful morning," he offered casually. "The Lalique butterfly brooch went for nearly double the estimate. Were you tempted?" James smiled politely. "It's a beautiful piece, but not what we're here for today." Alexander's interest visibly sharpened. "Oh? Something specific caught your eye in the afternoon lots?" "You could say that," James replied non-committally, effectively ending the conversation as he moved to join Emma at a quiet table in the corner. When the auction resumed at 2:15, the atmosphere had subtly shifted. The morning's predictable patterns gave way to a new undercurrent of anticipation. The remaining lots included some of the collection's most significant pieces, including the Padparadscha sapphire ring Emma had praised during her interview. Lot 49, a spectacular emerald and diamond necklace by Cartier, opened at $3, $2 million, and quickly escalated into a bidding war between a Saudi prince and a Chinese tech mogul, eventually selling for $5, $7 million to appreciative applause from the crowd. As Lot 52 approached, the Padparadscha sapphire ring, Emma straightened almost imperceptibly in her seat. The screens displayed detailed images of the ring from multiple angles, showcasing the unusual pink-orange stone and its deceptively simple platinum setting. Lot 52, an exceptional Padparadscha sapphire and diamond ring by Jean Desprez, circa 1925, the auctioneer announced. "We'll open the bidding at $800,000. Hands rose immediately, the price climbing steadily past $1 million, then $1.5. Emma watched with focused attention, but made no move to participate. At $2 million, the bidding narrowed to 3 determined participants: Alexander Harrington, a phone bidder represented by a Christie's associate, and an online bidder whose identity remained anonymous. At $2, $4 million, Alexander threw a confident glance around the room before increasing his bid to $2, $6 million. The phone bidder hesitated, consulted briefly, then reluctantly withdrew. The online bidder countered with $7 million almost immediately. Alexander frowned, clearly annoyed. At the persistent competition, the ping-pong continued, pushing past $3 million, well beyond the estimate. At $3 and $2 million, Alexander hesitated for the first time, his assistant leaning in to whisper something in his ear. He nodded grimly and raised his paddle again. $3, $5 million from Mr. Harrington, the auctioneer acknowledged. "Do I hear $3.6 million from our online bidder?" The room waited, all eyes on the auction liaison monitoring the online bids. After a tense moment, she nodded. $3.6 million from the online bidder. Alexander's jaw tightened visibly. He conferred briefly with his assistant, then shook his head slightly. The auctioneer noted the withdrawal and began the closing process. $3.6 million then. Going once, going twice. $4 million. The voice came from the third row, clear and confident. James Clarke held his paddle aloft, his expression calm, as the room collectively inhaled in surprise. Emma showed no reaction beyond a slight smile, her eyes remaining on the screen displaying the ring. Alexander Harrington turned in his seat, his expression a mixture of shock and calculation as he processed this unexpected competition. The auctioneer, momentarily startled, recovered professionally. $4 million from Mr. Clarke. Do I hear $4, $1 million from our online bidder? The auction liaison shook her head after a moment. The online bidder had withdrawn. $4 million then. Going once, going twice? The auctioneer paused, his gaze scanning the room for any final interest. Alexander remained still, his expression unreadable. Sold to Mr. James Clarke for $4 million. A murmur rippled through the crowd as James nodded acknowledgement. Emma's smile widened slightly, her hand finding his beneath the auction catalogue. The moment was brief, but noted by those watching closely. This wasn't just an investment, it was personal. The auction continued, the energy in the room noticeably heightened by James's unexpected bid. The next few lots proceeded without his participation, Alexander Harrington securing 2 more pieces with aggressive bidding that suggested equal parts investment strategy and wounded pride. At lot 61, something unexpected happened. The item was a complete parure, matching necklace, earrings and bracelet, in diamonds and sapphires by Van Cleef & Arpels, considered one of the collection's crown jewels, with an estimate of $7 to $9 million. As the bidding opened, James raised his paddle immediately. $10 million. The room went absolutely still. Opening with a bid that exceeded the high estimate was almost unheard of in auction strategy. It was not just a bid, it was a statement of intent so clear that even the auctioneer paused momentarily before acknowledging it. $10 million from Mr. Clarke. Do I hear 10? 5 million. A few interested parties conferred hurriedly with advisors, but the aggressive opening had its intended effect. After a tense silence, the auctioneer continued. $10 million then. Going once, going twice. Another scan of the room confirmed no further interest. Sold to Mr. James Clarke for $10 million. Alexander Harrington shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his attention now fully focused on James. This was no longer about individual pieces, something else was happening. The pattern continued. Lot 63, a rare Boucheron clock in rock crystal, jade and diamonds, estimated at $2. $5 million. James bid $3 million and secured it unopposed. Lot 65, a Cartier mystery clock valued at $4 million. James offered $5 million and again faced no competition. By Lot 67, a pattern had emerged that even the least observant attendee couldn't miss. James Clarke was systematically acquiring every remaining piece in the collection, each time opening with a bid that exceeded the high estimate by enough to discourage competition without being financially irresponsible. The crowd's initial surprise gave way to fascination, then speculation. Phones emerged as attendees messaged associates and searched for information about the Clarke's collecting history. Nothing in public records suggested James had previously shown interest in jewelry of this period or value. Richard Montgomery observed from the side of the room, his expression carefully neutral, but his posture increasingly tense as he watched the unprecedented scenario unfold. The other Christie's executives huddled nearby, their whispered conversations betraying both excitement at the prices being achieved and concern about the unusual pattern. As Lot 70 sold to James for $6, $8 million, another unopposed bid, Alexander Harrington finally broke. He stood abruptly and made his way to the auction house's executive director, Robert Phillips, who was observing from near the exit. Their conversation, though hushed, was animated. Alexander gesturing emphatically toward James, while Robert maintained a placating expression. Emma noted the interaction with apparent disinterest, her attention remaining on her catalogue as she occasionally marked notes beside items. Her serene composure contrasted sharply with the room's growing tension as the final lots approached. Lot 72 featured the last of the major pieces, an extraordinary Egyptian revival sautoir by Cartier, nearly 30 inches long, featuring lapis, lazuli, coral, emeralds and diamonds in a design that had been featured in museum exhibitions worldwide. At an estimate of $12 to $15 million, it represented the collection's most valuable single item. As the screens displayed detailed images of the piece, Emma leaned closer to James, whispering something that brought a slight smile to his face. He nodded, hand briefly covering hers before returning his attention to the auctioneer. Lot 72, The Cartier Egyptian Revival Sautoir, circa 1922, the auctioneer announced, his voice betraying a hint of heightened anticipation. A truly museum-quality piece with impeccable provenance. We'll open the bidding at $12 million, and the room waited, all eyes on James. To everyone's surprise, he remained still, making no move toward his paddle. After an awkward pause, a representative for a Middle Eastern museum consortium raised her paddle. $12 million from paddle number 37, the auctioneer acknowledged, his relief audible. Do I hear 12 does? 5 million? Another bidder, representing a prominent American jewelry collector, entered the fray. The price climbed steadily in $500,000 increments, passing $14 million with no sign of James's participation. Alexander Harrington, who had returned to his seat, watched the proceedings with narrowed eyes, clearly suspicious of the sudden change in pattern. At $16 million, as the bidding appeared to be settling into a rhythm between the museum consortium and the American collector James finally raised his paddle. $20 million. The collective gasp was audible. Even Emma blinked, though her expression quickly returned to one of composed interest. The jump bid was not just aggressive, it was definitive, a clear message that he would not be outbid on this piece. The museum representative consulted frantically with her principals via phone, while the American collector's agent shook his head firmly, withdrawing from contention. After nearly a minute of tense consultation, the museum representative also lowered her paddle. $20 million then, the auctioneer confirmed, unable to completely mask his excitement at the record-breaking price. Going once, going twice. One final scan of the room confirmed no further interest. Sold to Mr. James Clarke for $20 million. A smattering of stunned applause broke out, quickly fading as the implications of what they had witnessed began to sink in. James had now acquired every significant lot in the afternoon session, amassing nearly $65 million in purchases over the span of less than 2 hours. As the auctioneer prepared to introduce the final minor lots, Robert Phillips approached the podium and conferred briefly with him. After a moment, the auctioneer nodded and addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, at the request of the buyer, we will be taking a brief 15-minute recess before proceeding with the final lots. Please feel free to visit the refreshment area during this time. The crowd buzzed with speculation as James and Emma rose calmly and followed Robert Phillips and Richard Montgomery through a side door into the gallery's private conference room. Alexander Harrington watched their departure with undisguised frustration, pulling out his phone and stepping into the hall to make a call. In the mahogany-paneled conference room, Robert Phillips closed the door firmly behind them, his professional composure slightly strained. Mr. Clarke, while Christie's is of course thrilled with your enthusiasm for the collection, I must admit this is unusual. Is there something specific you wish to discuss about the remaining lots? James smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way it hadn't during the auction. Yes, Robert. I'd like to make this simple for everyone. I'm prepared to purchase the entire remaining collection at 20% above the high estimate for each piece. Robert blinked rapidly, processing the unprecedented offer. The entire remaining collection, that's 23 more lots. 24, Emma corrected gently. Lot 75 was omitted from the final printed catalogue, but appears in the online version. Richard Montgomery nodded, impressed by her attention to detail. Mrs. Clarke is correct. There was a late correction. Robert regained his composure, years of experience in handling high-value clients taking over. While the offer is extraordinarily generous, Mr. Clarke, we have a responsibility to our consignor to maximize value through the competitive auction process. Some pieces might achieve even higher prices if 30% above high estimate, James interrupted calmly. With immediate wire transfer and no conditions on authentication beyond what's already been disclosed, we can complete the transaction. Today, the two Christie's executives exchanged glances, the calculation evident in their expressions. The remaining lots were minor pieces compared to what had already sold. While some might exceed estimates in competitive bidding, others might fall short. The certainty of a 30% premium across the board, plus the appeal of an immediate clean transaction, was undeniably attractive. "I'll need to consult with the consignor," Robert finally said. "This is unprecedented." James nodded. "Of course, I believe you have their representative on standby, as we discussed yesterday evening." Richard's expression confirmed this. Arrangement, giving Robert no room to delay. "Yes, we do. If you'll excuse me for a few minutes." As Robert left to make the call, Richard turned to the Clarkes with undisguised curiosity. "May I ask, why this particular collection? Your bidding pattern suggests this is more than investment." Emma exchanged a glance with James before responding. "The collection belonged to Elizabeth Whitmore Hayes. She was my grandmother's closest friend. When my grandmother died, Elizabeth became a surrogate grandmother to me. She encouraged my interest in jewelry design and authentication from the time I was a child." Understanding dawned on Richard's face. "You knew the collection intimately." Emma nodded. "I practically grew up with these pieces. When Elizabeth passed last year at 97, her grandson Harrison inherited everything. He has no appreciation for the history or craftsmanship. He saw only financial value to be liquidated as quickly as possible." "We tried to purchase the collection privately," James added. "Harrison refused, believing an auction would drive higher prices. He was particularly difficult about it, suggesting that Emma's sentimental attachment was irrelevant." Emma's expression remained composed, but a flash of old pain crossed her eyes. "He said some rather unkind things about my background, and whether I deserved to own pieces of this caliber." James's jaw tightened momentarily, which is why yesterday's reception was particularly unfortunate. Richard winced. "I see. That makes the situation even more regrettable." The door opened as Robert returned, his expression revealing the outcome before he spoke. "The consignor has accepted your offer, Mr. Clarke. 30% above high. Estimate for all remaining lots, with standard buyer's premium applied." James nodded. "Excellent. My office will arrange the wire transfer immediately. I assume Christie's can handle the paperwork promptly?" "Of course," Robert assured him. "We can have everything prepared within the hour. The total purchase price, including this morning's acquisitions and buyer's premium, will be approximately $112, $6 million. "That's acceptable," James said, as casually as if discussing lunch plans. "Emma will need to inspect each piece before we finalize, but I don't anticipate any issues given her prior familiarity with the collection." Robert's eyes widened slightly at this revelation, but he recovered quickly. "We'll arrange private access to the secure viewing room immediately, and how would you like to proceed with the announcement to the auction attendees?" James considered this for a moment. Simply inform them that the remaining lots have been acquired through private sale and the auction is concluded. No need for details at this time. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Emma paused. "One moment, James." She turned to Richard. "The young man at reception yesterday, Gregory, the one who was reassigned today." Richard shifted, uncomfortably. "Yes, his behavior was completely unacceptable. We've taken appropriate—" "Don't fire him," Emma interrupted gently. "He reflected the culture he was trained in. Use this as an opportunity to change that culture. Everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow." Richard nodded slowly, genuine respect evident in his expression. "I understand. Thank you for your graciousness, Mrs. Clarke." When they returned to the auction room, the crowd had reassembled, speculation running rampant. Robert Phillips stepped to the podium, his voice carrying the practiced authority of decades in the business. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. I'm pleased to announce that the remaining lots in today's auction have been acquired through private sale. The auction is now concluded. On behalf of Christie's, we thank you for your participation in this historic event and invite you to join us for a closing reception in the main gallery." The announcement was met with a mixture of surprise, disappointment, and renewed speculation. Alexander Harrington approached the podium immediately, his conversation with Robert too hushed to overhear, but his body language betraying clear frustration. As James and Emma made their way toward the exit, Jessica Montgomery intercepted them, her earlier social calculation replaced by genuine curiosity. "That was extraordinary," she said, addressing Emma rather than James. "I've never seen anything like it. May I ask why? These pieces are magnificent, of course, but to acquire an entire collection..." Emma regarded her thoughtfully before responding. "Sometimes value isn't measured in carats or auction records, Jessica. These pieces tell a story, one that matters to me personally. They belong together, just as Elizabeth always intended." Understanding dawned slowly on Jessica's face. "You knew the original owner?" Emma nodded. "She taught me everything I know about jewelry. This collection is coming home, where it belongs." The realization visibly affected Jessica, her carefully constructed social persona momentarily giving way to something more genuine. "That's actually quite beautiful. I'm sorry about yesterday, truly." "Life is full of second chances," Emma replied simply. "We all deserve them." As they continued toward the exit, numerous attendees attempted to engage them, some offering congratulations, others barely disguising their desire to understand the strategy behind such an unprecedented acquisition. James fielded most inquiries with polite brevity, while Emma maintained the same serene composure she had displayed throughout. Helena Beaumont approached with her camera crew, clearly hoping for a final statement. "Mr. Clarke, Mrs. Clarke, would you care to share anything about your historic acquisition with our audience?" James glanced at Emma, who nodded slightly. He turned to the camera, his expression thoughtful. "The Luminous Collection represents not just extraordinary craftsmanship, but a personal legacy that deserves to be preserved intact. These pieces will not be separated or locked away in a vault. They'll be properly documented, studied, and eventually displayed, where they can inspire a new generation of artisans and historians." Emma added, "Beauty should never be exclusive. True appreciation comes from understanding, not ownership. That's what Elizabeth always taught me." Bah! As they finally exited the gallery into the spring sunshine, the story was already spreading through collecting circles worldwide. By evening, it would be featured in arts publications and social media, analyzed and discussed in a dozen languages. But for Emma and James, walking hand in hand down the busy Manhattan sidewalk, the day's significance was far more personal than public. They moved unhurriedly, discussing the pieces with the easy familiarity of long partnership, occasionally pausing to share a memory or observation. To passers-by, they appeared ordinary, a well-dressed but unremarkable couple enjoying the afternoon, nothing about their appearance suggesting they had just completed one of the most significant private art acquisitions of the decade. 3 months later, Christie's hosted a gala opening for a special exhibition, the Luminous Legacy, the Elizabeth Whitmore Hayes Collection. The exhibition catalogue credited Emma Clarke as guest curator and featured her scholarly analysis of each piece alongside previously unpublished photographs of Elizabeth wearing the jewelry throughout her remarkable life. The invitation only preview night drew an elite crowd, but with a notable difference from the auction preview. Interspersed among the expected VIPs were students from New York's design schools, aspiring jewelers, and rising authentication experts, all sponsored by the newly established Clarke Foundation for Decorative Arts Education. Gregory, the former concierge, now served as community outreach coordinator for the exhibition, personally welcoming the scholarship recipients with genuine warmth. His transformation from gatekeeper to guide represented the larger shift the incident had inspired. Within Christie's corporate culture, Emma moved through the exhibition in a simple black dress, the silver vine brooch her only adornment, as she shared stories about Elizabeth and the collection with enraptured listeners. James observed from a distance, his pride evident as he watched. His wife in her element, not as a billionaire's partner, but as an expert whose knowledge and humanity had transformed an institution. Alexander Harrington arrived fashionably late, his initial discomfort giving way to grudging appreciation as he toured the exhibition. When he finally approached Emma, it was with unexpected humility. "You've created something remarkable here," he acknowledged, "preserving not just the pieces, but their context and meaning. I underestimated what you were doing." Emma smiled. "It's never too late to see beauty differently, Alexander. Elizabeth taught me that." As the evening concluded, Richard Montgomery raised a toast to the Clarkes and their vision for the collection's future. To Emma and James, who reminded us all that true value lies not in acquisition, but in preservation and education. And to Elizabeth Whitmore Hayes, whose magnificent eye for beauty will now inspire generations to come. The assembled crowd applauded warmly, many eyes turning to the central display where the Padparadscha sapphire ring, the first piece James had bid on, held pride of place. Beside it stood a photograph of a young Emma, perhaps 16, examining the ring while an elegant, elderly woman looked on with evident pride. The caption read simply, "Elizabeth Whitmore Hayes, teaching Emma Clarke about craftsmanship, 1999. Some lessons transcend time, just as true beauty transcends ownership." Outside, New York continued its restless pace, unaware of the quiet revolution that had begun with a simple woman in a vintage dress being judged by her appearance rather than her knowledge. Within the gallery walls, a new standard had been set, one that valued expertise over exclusivity, understanding over ownership, and the power of returning treasures to where they truly belonged, in the hands of those who loved them enough to share their beauty with the world. News of James Clarke's unprecedented acquisition spread through the auction room like wildfire. Attendees who had moments ago been competing for individual pieces now gathered in stunned clusters, their conversations a mixture of incredulity and speculation. Never in Christie's history had a single buyer acquired an entire high-value collection mid-auction, particularly not after such a public strategy of intimidation bidding. In the private conference room adjacent to the auction floor, paperwork was being prepared with remarkable efficiency. The final purchase price, $112, $6 million including buyer's premium, represented one of the largest single-day jewelry acquisitions in auction history. Robert Phillips personally supervised the documentation process, his expression oscillating between professional composure and barely concealed amazement at the unprecedented transaction. "The wire transfer has been confirmed," James's financial director announced, ending a call with their private bank. "Funds have been received in full." Robert nodded, visibly relieved, despite having never doubted the Clarkes' financial capacity. "Excellent. The official transfer of ownership is complete. The collection is yours, Mr. and Mrs. Clarke." Emma sat quietly near the window, her attention focused on the sapphire ring James had purchased first, the modest but perfect pad paracha piece that had sparked her earlier praise. She held it carefully, turning it to catch the light, her expression one of quiet remembrance. "Shall we arrange for immediate secure transport?" Robert asked, gesturing to the various security personnel standing by. "Our team can have everything prepared within the hour." James glanced at Emma before responding. "Actually, we have a different proposition. We'd like Christie's to host a special exhibition of the complete collection before it leaves your facilities." Robert blinked in surprise. "An exhibition, but the auction has concluded. Not a sales exhibition," Emma clarified, looking up from the ring. "An educational one. The Luminous Collection represents one of the most comprehensive assemblages of Art Nouveau and early Art Deco jewelry ever assembled. It should be shared, studied, appreciated in its entirety before it disappears into private hands." Understanding dawned on Robert's face. "You want to make the collection publicly accessible?" "For 6 weeks," James confirmed, "with appropriate security, of course. We'll cover all additional costs beyond your standard post-auction procedures." Richard Montgomery, who had been observing quietly from the corner, stepped forward. "That's extraordinarily generous. Most buyers of this caliber prefer immediate transfer to private vaults or homes." Emma's smile held a hint of sadness. Elizabeth never kept these pieces in a vault. She wore them, shared them, taught with them. They were tools for education as much as objects of beauty. That legacy should continue, at least for a little while. Robert hesitated, clearly calculating the logistical challenges against the public relations opportunity. "We would need to reconfigure the exhibition space, develop new materials explaining the collection's significance now that it remains intact. Emma will provide all necessary scholarship and context," James stated, not as a request but a condition. "She's been documenting this collection since she was 19. No one knows it better." Richard and Robert exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We would be honored to host such an exhibition," Richard finally said. "It's an unprecedented opportunity." As they finalized the exhibition details, a soft knock at the door preceded the appearance of Helena Beaumont, Christie's social media director, whose expression suggested barely contained excitement. "Excuse the interruption, but I thought you should know. The auction has gone viral. Luminous Legacy and Emma Clarke Truth are trending globally. The video of yesterday's incident, contrasted with today's acquisition, is being shared everywhere. The public response is overwhelming." She handed Robert her tablet, where social media feeds displayed thousands of comments celebrating Emma's vindication and James's dramatic intervention. The narrative had already crystallized into something mythic. The quiet expert humiliated by elitists, whose husband then bought the entire collection as the ultimate statement of respect for her expertise. "It seems we've struck a chord," James observed, his tone neutral but a hint of satisfaction visible in his eyes. Robert scrolled through the comments, his expression growing more concerned. "This puts Christie's in a rather difficult position. The behavior yesterday appears like exactly what it was," Emma completed gently. "An opportunity for growth. No institution is perfect, Robert. What matters is how we respond when our failings are revealed." Her use of "we" rather than "you" wasn't lost on the Christie's executives. It offered a path forward, not condemnation, but collaboration. "The exhibition gives us all a chance to reframe the narrative," Richard suggested, professional instinct for damage control asserting itself. "To demonstrate a commitment to education and accessibility rather than exclusivity." James nodded. "Precisely. And speaking of accessibility, We have one more condition for the exhibition. The executives braced themselves visibly. We want it open to students, free of charge. Art schools, design programs, gemology students, not just the usual VIPs. The relief on their faces was evident. Of course, we can arrange special viewings, perhaps some master classes. Not special viewings, Emma interrupted firmly. Regular hours, regular access, alongside other visitors. No velvet rope separating future artisans from the masterpieces that should inspire them. Outside in the main auction hall, Alexander Harrington paced impatiently, repeatedly checking his watch as the private meeting extended well beyond the expected duration. When the doors finally opened and the Clarkes emerged with the Christie's executives, he moved immediately to intercept them. "James, a word?" he requested, his tone suggesting entitlement to an explanation. "That was quite a performance. Care to share what game you're playing? These pieces will need proper handling, proper display." "They'll have exactly that," James replied calmly. "The collection will remain at Christie's for a special 6-week exhibition before moving to its permanent home." Alexander's expression shifted from confusion to calculation. "An exhibition? Interesting approach. I assume you'll be selling individual pieces afterward at private markup? I'd be interested in discussing the Cartier Sautoir and perhaps the Emerald Suite." "The collection will remain intact," Emma stated, her quiet voice somehow carrying more authority than Alexander's practiced projection. "As Elizabeth always intended." Alexander's brow furrowed. Elizabeth Whitmore Hayes. You knew her." "She was my mentor," Emma replied simply. "She taught me everything I know about jewelry, authentication, and history. These pieces aren't just inventory to me, Alexander. They're her legacy." Understanding dawned slowly on Alexander's face, followed by something approaching genuine embarrassment. "I had no idea there was a personal connection. Why didn't you say something yesterday when—" "Would it have mattered?" James asked, his tone not accusatory but genuinely curious. Would knowing Emma's connection to Elizabeth have changed how she was received based on her appearance? Alexander had the grace to look uncomfortable. Perhaps not immediately, but context matters. History matters." "Precisely," Emma agreed gently, "which is why preserving the collection's context and history matters so much. These pieces tell a story together that they cannot tell separately." As they moved toward the exit, other attendees approached with varying degrees of curiosity and contrition. Jessica Montgomery managed to position herself directly in their path, her expression carefully arranged to convey admiration rather than the dismissal she had shown the previous day. "What an extraordinary outcome," she gushed, addressing James rather than Emma. "You must have planned this strategy for months. Absolutely brilliant maneuvering." James smiled politely but stepped slightly aside, forcing Jessica to acknowledge Emma's presence. "Actually, this was a rather recent decision. After witnessing how my wife was treated yesterday, despite being the foremost expert on this collection, it seemed appropriate to ensure the pieces would be properly appreciated." Jessica flushed slightly. "Yes. Well, appearances can be so deceiving, can't they? Had we known Mrs. Clarke's credentials—" "That's rather the point, isn't it?" Emma interjected gently. "Credentials aren't always visible. Expertise doesn't always announce itself with designer labels." Jessica's discomfort was palpable, but Emma continued with genuine warmth. "We'd love for you to attend the exhibition. Opening, in fact, your perspective as someone who appreciates fine jewelry would be valuable for some of the educational programming we're planning." The olive branch was unexpected, Jessica's surprise evident as she struggled to recalibrate her understanding of the woman she had so casually dismissed. Yes, I'd be honored. Thank you." As they finally reached the lobby, they encountered Gregory, the concierge, who had initially blocked Emma's entry. He stood awkwardly near the exit, having clearly positioned himself to intercept them before they left. His previous arrogance had vanished, replaced by genuine discomfort. "Mrs. Clarke, Mr. Clarke," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I wanted to apologize personally for my behavior yesterday. It was unprofessional and unkind. I've submitted my resignation to management, effective immediately." Emma studied him thoughtfully. "That seems unnecessary, Gregory. Mistakes are opportunities for growth, not reasons for punishment. But my conduct was inexcusable. And yet here you are, taking responsibility and apologizing. That suggests you're capable of learning and changing." Emma glanced at Richard Montgomery, who had followed them to the lobby. Perhaps Gregory might be involved in the exhibition planning. His perspective on making new visitors feel welcome would be particularly valuable, given his recent insights. Richard nodded slowly, understanding her intent. "An excellent suggestion. We'll discuss possibilities if Gregory is interested." The young man's expression shifted from resignation to cautious hope. Yes, I would be very interested. Thank you, Mrs. Clarke." As they finally exited the building, James placed a gentle hand at the small of Emma's back, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You never cease to amaze me. Most people in your position would want retribution, not redemption." Emma smiled, the spring sunshine highlighting the silver at her temples. Elizabeth always said that true value shows itself under pressure. That applies to people as much as to gemstones. The next 6 weeks transformed Christie's premier gallery. The Luminous Collection exhibition drew record crowds, with lines often extending around the block. The narrative had captured public imagination. The quiet expert, the arrogant elite, the dramatic acquisition, and the decision to share rather than sequester the treasures. Emma was a constant presence, personally conducting tours for student groups and patiently explaining technical details to aspiring designers. Her simple attire remained unchanged. Practical dresses, minimal jewelry, the silver vine brooch her only consistent adornment. But the reception it received had transformed completely. What had once been deemed insufficient was now recognized as the practical choice of someone who prioritized the art over personal display. Gregory, somewhat to his own surprise, discovered a talent for education and outreach. His initial assignment coordinating student visits evolved into developing a full program for first-time auction attendees, eliminating the intimidation factor that had previously characterized Christie's environment. On the exhibition's closing night, Emma and James hosted a special event for an unusual mixture of guests: major collectors alongside jewelry design students, auction house regulars beside first-time visitors who had been inspired by the social media story. The collection, soon to leave for its new home, sparkled under perfect lighting as Emma addressed the gathered crowd. "Beauty isn't meant to be hoarded," she began, her voice soft but carrying effortlessly through the hushed gallery. Elizabeth understood that these pieces were never just possessions. They were vehicles for stories, for history, for teaching future generations about craftsmanship and artistry. She gestured to the assembled students. "When Elizabeth first showed me this collection, I was 19, a community college student who couldn't afford textbooks, let alone jewelry. But she saw something in me worth nurturing, just as these pieces contain artistry worth preserving." James stepped forward to join her, his hand finding hers. "Which is why we're pleased to announce the establishment of the Whitmore Hayes Fellowship for Decorative Arts Education. Each year, 10 students who might otherwise lack access to formal training will receive full scholarships to pursue studies in jewelry design, gemology, or authentication." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd as Emma continued. Additionally, the collection will not be disappearing into a private vault. We're establishing a permanent teaching collection at the Metropolitan Museum, with rotating exhibitions at smaller regional museums to ensure these pieces continue to educate and inspire. Alexander Harrington, who had been watching from the side of the room, stepped forward. "If I might add something?" At Emma's nod, he addressed the crowd. "I've been a collector for 30 years, and I've never seen anyone handle acquisition quite like the Clarkes. They've managed to transform what could have been simply a victory lap into a genuine public good." He turned to face Emma and James directly. "You've shown us all a better way to think about collecting. I'd like to contribute to the fellowship, and if you'll permit it, and perhaps loan some pieces from my own collection to the educational initiative." The gesture represented something more significant than the financial contribution. It was acknowledgement that values were shifting, not just within Christie's but throughout the collecting world. The sincere gratitude in Emma's expression as she accepted spoke volumes about her priorities. As the evening progressed, Jessica Montgomery approached Emma with uncharacteristic hesitancy. "I've been thinking about what you said, about credentials not always being visible. I've started a mentorship program at my foundation, pairing established collectors with young people from diverse backgrounds interested in arts administration. I'd love your input on making it truly accessible, not just performatively inclusive." Emma's smile was genuine. "I'd be happy to help. Change happens one conversation at a time." In the months that followed, the auction became a case study in art world publications, not just for the record-breaking sales figures, but for the sea change it had initiated in how auction houses approached accessibility and education. Christie's competitive advantage had unexpectedly emerged, not from further exclusivity, but from opening doors previously kept firmly shut. The sapphire ring, the first piece James had bid on, found a special place in the teaching collection. Its display card told the simple story of how Elizabeth had used it to teach a young Emma about color assessment and craftsmanship standards. Next to it sat a workbench where students could examine practice stones under similar lighting conditions, experiencing the same lessons Emma had received decades earlier. On quiet mornings, before the museum opened to the public, Emma sometimes visited alone. She would stand before the display cases, remembering Elizabeth's hands carefully holding each piece, her voice explaining the technical brilliance behind the beauty. In those moments, the 112.6 million price tag seemed almost irrelevant. The true value had always been in the knowledge passed from one generation to the next, in the stories preserved along with the craftsmanship. James would often find her there, lost in memory, and wait patiently until she was ready to leave. He understood better than anyone that his dramatic gesture at the auction had never really been about ownership, or even about vindicating Emma against those who had dismissed her. It had been about honoring a promise, ensuring that what Elizabeth had built would continue to teach and inspire long after both she and the Clarkes were gone. The Luminous Collection had found its purpose not as a possession, but as a legacy. One that illuminated paths forward for those who might otherwise never have seen such beauty up close. And in that transformation from private treasure to public resource, it had truly earned its name. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.